No.
Yeah, I think we're gonna be going with one. Yes, yes, and so you will do the
Yes,
announcement. You can do
but I cannot.
this. This is a new list.
Okay. Um, do you have a PowerPoint presentation? You don't. Cool. Uh, so, do you have a presentation?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. It's very sticky. I don't know. No, it's not bad. So, I mean, you can. Theo,
Yeah.
I cannot see the.
What?
I cannot see the number.
Really?
But I just did.
So there's a contact. You can take this out actually. Okay, now.
Which is it? First one. Right.
So this will make my class. You need a pen.
It's true. And I'm putting inside the this in the desktop and I put
Yes,
this in
makes
the
sense.
browser.
Alex,
Okay? You're welcome. Now I have to
yes, the first slide that will do. So, wait, Alex.
Alex.
Sure. Alex. Yeah, it's on my computer. Yes. Oh, yes, I need to sort of be the choice of God. Yeah. Yeah, but there's some. You can maybe replace that. Okay.
Where's Katerina? Katerina is like
Okay.
yes. The higher stuff. Yeah, that's that. Scripted Ireland.
Okay.
I don't know. My grandma from. I think that's okay. When you want that, I can say of things. I know.
Well, I mean, still need to bring a PDF here for presentation, okay? Not the presentation of Alex.
Yeah, but
I think
you can put really over here to the 14-minute mark. 1 minute, so I will finish one. Keep ready to wrap it. Just one piece of this one is was connected.
that's to charge the phone of Java.
But
But
that
it's
belongs to that is belongs
that's to
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
the phone, the computer. Or, yes, you can take the USB
Yes,
after. Huh?
nice. And we plug when when there is a change between this.
And then we will need to
So
like plug.
what?
Okay.
It's 17 minutes.
But then
Okay.
no. Like you mean? Okay, so then we can. Okay, so to the bar.
Yes, please.
Send the file.
Yes, please.
I sent it through Telegram.
The Telegram is perfect.
Like, but I don't. Yeah, I think I can do it. I think look. Second thing is with that I think you want to get. Okay. Okay. So I say here when it's my turn, I can take it up. Exactly. You take the cable and I can bring it to you to run like with. Okay. I can bring you the some cables.
Oops. So, hello everyone, welcome back. Before starting, we had a short conversation between the organizers during the lunch break. And so I'm in that capacity as organizer here, sharing with you a couple of things. And I want to remember all of you that we developed a brave space policy that as organizer, we want that implemented. You can find the copies online. We put on the in the chat. I sent to the presenters. There are copies also in the venue, and it's this one. So I would like to remember that we have this, and I want to focus only on a couple of points. The first is respectful behavior. So maintain a fear-free atmosphere and make possible to everyone to feel safe. And then the second one, solidarity and assume good intentions. So we are all together here in order to enjoy the conference. So please assume good intentions between all of us. And the third, controversy with respect. Okay, I think that is self-evident. I will not read all the others. I invite you all, but just the first three are more than enough. I want to remember that there are three conflictual aspects sometimes. The participants that want to take the most from what is happening, the organizer that have the full pictures of what is happening, and then also the speakers that they want to present their work. And sometimes it's hard to find the common ground for all the different needs of all these actors. So please remember that we are here to enjoy all of us and we want to build a different world. Okay, so thank you.
Um, Hello, my name is Krini. I'm moderating today's session. And I just want to ask for your assistance today because in order for us to start and finish this on time, we do all have to cooperate. Everybody needs to participate in this. So I'm going to ask the speakers to stick to the time. I will politely and respectfully cut them off. If they go over the time, we can't have questions. I would also like to remind people that not every question can be answered. That happens at every conference. The Brave Space policy says we're going to try to ask people who haven't spoken before or haven't spoken much before to speak. And also, I remind you there are many opportunities for us to engage with each other and discuss throughout the conference and socially and over lunch and in the evening. One more request is I would ask that we don't distract the speakers. So that means please try to limit your moving around in front of them. Please don't shout out different things during the session. We can ask afterwards or make our comments afterwards. And finally, I would like you all to remember that I think most of us here are not professional moderators, not professional facilitators. We all come from different political cultures. We have different levels of capacity and experience and different capacity to deal with things happening on the spot. So please remember that. That's definitely true of me as well. Thank you. Okay, today's first speaker, or rather this session's first speaker, is Katerina-Shelagh Boucoyannis. She will introduce herself briefly.
Escritorio.
Oh, but I can't.
So my name is Katerina-Shelagh Boucoyannis. I'm a master's student in the University of Padua and the University of Universidad Andina Simón Bolívar in Ecuador, Quito. And this is my reading of a case that we visited last semester that I'm very happy to share, but I'd like to apologize in advance if I go from notes to speaking, because I'd like to, being very aware of the fact that this is a project that is very far away from here, then I only had the chance to visit once and study during one semester. I want to do it justice and pay respect to the people who are actually have dedicated more than 30 years of their lives to it. So this is the beautiful region of Intag, and I'd like to start by setting the tone. I don't. I'd like to begin with a framework that is grounded in political ecology, that kind of demonstrates the uncomfortable truth about the green transition, which is that which is based on the colonial logic on which it is founded. And I'd like to explore like a series of different terms that are related to the green transition, starting from the externalization of the costs of it, meaning how environmental and social costs of the green transition in the global north are from wealthy nations actually out burdening vulnerable communities and regions in the global south of what we call the majority world, creating sacrifice zones. The other interesting term is the concept of green colonialism, which encapsulates the conflict stemming from these renewable energy projects and not only. And under the guise of climate adaptation, it fosters these extractive economies that exploit the land and the labor of the global south to kind of to cover the needs of what we call green commodities, and this the outcome of this is the perpetuation of colonial relationships of resource extraction. So another interesting term is the concept of unequal exchange. Like these resources have a specific price in the global south, but when they're exported in the global north, they have a completely different price, which does not cover the environmental and social impact of the extraction and exploitation of the lands. And all this could be nicely narrowed down to is actually it's not narrowed down, but it can be very well accompanied by the term Netherlands fallacy, which is how the wealthy nations of the global north claim they are greener or they have achieved this green transition, when in fact what has happened is they have kind of pushed under the rug like most of the price of the green transition towards the majority world. So what this makes us understand how the green transition, without questioning like the foundations of injustice that are part of it, they will end up it will end up perpetuating the situation of the climate of injustice that it aimed to combat. So this is very important to point out how this has a very different impact in different regions from the north to the south. This is a map of the CO2 emissions per capita, which demonstrates how countries of the global north hold most of the CO2 consumption in the world compared to the global south. And on top of that, there's different comparison between the urban and the rural, which means that rural communities are frequently the ones who are stripped of agency over their land, of their resources, when at the same time they're the ones that are most dependent on it. So in order to tackle all this, these land encroachments, the lack of agency of rural populations, and the systemic violence that comes hand in hand with it, we advocate that what our goal should be the decolonization of how climate governance happens, well, all around the world, and how it should center on the experiences of local communities, recognizing their own adaptation strategies and cultural practices that are essential for cultivating a non-corporate, democratic, decentralized, and redistributive model transition. Because energy transition is not nuclear physics. Like, we can actually do it. It's the science and politics behind it that kind of presents it as something that has to happen in an upper level of governance, whether when at the same time local solutions are happening and could offer viable alternatives to the dominant one. So this kind of builds up to what research calls community-based energy transition models that are flourishing all around the world as alternatives to traditional energy systems. And what in the emphasis the emphasis on the vital regional aspects, the control of resources in the terms of environmental stewardship, bottom up and participatory democracy, and insufficiency and redistribution of resources instead of accumulation of resources. So this encompasses a shift away from the exploitation and also the consumerist logic that comes with it, towards radically advocating for sufficiency and autonomy in the form of a non-corporate transition based on community efforts and the use of sustainable energy resources. So this brings me to the case I'd like to present to you, which is the case of Intag. Intag is a mountainous territory in the north of Quito, the capital of Ecuador, which is it's known for its biodiversity and cultural richness. It's home to some of the most important water resources of the region and important biodiversity. And its water resources transcend the limits. The importance of the water resources transcend the limits of the territory, in the sense that it provides water to all the surrounding areas. But like all biodiverse regions of the global south, it faces significant challenges due to deforestation, mining, water population, and increased vulnerability of citizens. So this is this very beautiful and unique place in the world where 60% of the actual territory has been seized for mining. This means because actually under the ground, under this biodiverse ground, there is a really big amount of copper and other rare metals that obviously some companies wanted to take advantage of. So this means that Intag has been in struggle since the 1990s, like when the first companies came there wanting to extract with the agreement of the local government and the national government. They have been in struggle trying to protect the area from mining. And it's important to note here that the one is Intag and the other one is the images from Chile. There's a huge difference in copper mining from one case to the other. The thing is, in Chile, it's like 2 millimeters of rain per year in this region, whereas in Intag, it's 3,000 to 5,000 millimeters of rain per year, which is why this area kind of provides water to the wider region. So it's not that it's not as more important as a region, but its impacts can be more impactful to in a wider area. And also, of course, Intag is home to much more communities because of its biodiversity and the abundance of resources. There are many communities, much more communities that live in this area in very close proximity that are directly affected by mining, which in the case of the desert of Atacama, for example, is not the case. Not that I'm supporting the desert, but just to highlight how how little sense it makes for copper mining in this regions. So this is um, a short overview of how people have been struggling against this mining, and a continued struggle that ranges from lawsuits to different kinds of protests. And I would like to, and this different kind of process and um, a battle against mining has had many dimensions, from going to Canada and pursuing a case against the Canadian firm that wanted to make this mining project, to basing the legal cases on the Constitution of Ecuador, because Ecuador in 2008 made this new constitution that allows rights of nature to non more than human beings, and at the same time, whenever it comes to to a project that is of a significant environmental impact, companies need to have in informed previous and informed consultation so that the project can be legalized. And the other thing about this 2008 constitution is that the writing of rights to nature meant that creatures like this were the legal basis for legal battles against the mining companies. And this is a frog that was found after it was considered to be extinct since 1986, and they found it in a mining area. So it provided one more legal ground against the mining companies. So what I would like to okay. Okay. So this is a project I would actually like to sum up to, on how this resistance led to a project of community-based energy, renewable energy, where the watershed management of all the water resources of the area led to implementing small-scale hydroelectric plants, which meant which also feeds into the water raising anew. And this is an example of how the studies happened in the region. And this provides more energy than the entire region does actually need for its population. So I butchered this part a little bit, but this is not just this is the energy initiative that happened in the region, but it is only a small part of wider collection of alternatives that have flourished in the region since the 1990s. So there are like 43 groups, most of them based on social solidarity economy, that range from agroecological coffee production to women's associations producing artisanal products, and yes, and sustainable tourism. And I'd like to close this presentation highlighting how this is really important for the case of Ecuador, because the past, like after 2017, 2018, it has fallen deeper and deeper to the neoliberal bucket, with a highlight of this past year where water is short, and this means that energy is also short, and they're currently facing an energy shortage of over 14 hours per day. So this over highlights how important this energy transition, of this bottom-up energy transition, is for the region.
So now, if there are any questions, I'd like us to spend about 4 minutes asking some questions. Please be brief in your question, and remember, there's plenty of opportunity to speak afterwards and to go into more detail with this quick writing.
Can you tell a little bit more about right to the land? You mentioned extractivism and community-based energy solutions. What other issues under the right to land?
I mentioned the rights of nature, like
The
the legal rights of nature. So this is a new constitution. This is the constitution of Ecuador in 2008 granted rights to more than human beings. which means it could be a river could have rights, a monkey could have rights, an extinct frog in this case.
Beyond speciesism, right?
Beyond species, which means that the frog, and also the case with environmental law and the rest of the world, for example, means that if I don't have a legal, what do you call it? Not obligation. If I, it's very difficult to represent someone who is affected if I'm. Yeah. So when the frog is in danger, I can come in from the other side of the world and defend the frog. So this opens up this opens up a field of defense of nature to the whole wide world, which means that even another country can come and pursue the case against the Ecuadorian government, and we all could theoretically. I don't know if we're covering it. This could go hand in hand. I mean, it could be like ecocide could be based on the rights of nature in Ecuador.
Thank you. Yes, no.
Are you familiar with any of the ESG goals that are being used and the reverse lawsuits that are being used to shut down operations and mining operations? There's a law firm out of the UK, Mitra or something like that. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, what they do is they take local environmental laws and then they're able to try them back at the home territories of the corporations that are exploiting the lands. It's a specific department of this law firm. I would sideline any chance you familiar if you'd like to.
I think this is what happened with the Canadian enterprise who tried to do the mining. So one of the legal battles was going to the homeland and fighting the Canadian mining company in Canada. So this was also an ongoing battle that happened outside of Ecuador. I don't know if it's connected to the HG, but I think it's similar.
Apparently, they're being used as weapons in a good way, meaning they're going after corporations and they're exploiting regions under ESG laws.
Sounds pretty good, actually.
I'd love to introduce you to this.
Yes.
About these legal protections that were put in place in the Constitution, are they linked to the very long legal battle about Texaco that also happened in Ecuador? I think it was in the 70s or 80s. I don't remember the details of where it was, but a massive oil contaminated region that is still very effective to this day in Ecuador. And second question is, when these legal battles actually go to court, have they managed to stop companies, or have the companies used paralegal means to still get access to pollute?
It's a huge. First of all, Ecuador is divided in this is the Andean region of Ecuador, which means it's the mountains. Ecuador is mostly famous for the Amazon, which means oil spills, and it's not connected. I mean, it's the same country, but I don't. This company, I don't think it has been operating. I'll get to that. So, there's no petroleum there, so probably that company has not been there, but similar tools come from the same constitutions and use them in case of oil. And your second, if they have one. So in the case of Intag, they walk more than a couple of times in some, but it's like I said, 60% of the land is open to mining. So it's an ongoing battle and many different legal battles. So in theory, they have won court cases, but still, it's not always. It's like what happens in Greece. Like you win a battle, but then there's nobody there to make sure that you won the battle, and they're going to take back what they've already done. Because sometimes they've already started the damage, and this is the case of, for example, the Amazon, the oil spilling in the Amazon. And they don't recover. Like, for example, what he said, this referendum that happened 2 years ago in Ecuador, which was a 10-year battle of the environmental organization and indigenous community to stop oil drilling in the most biodiverse region of the Amazon rainforest. And after 10 years, they managed to have a referendum and win the referendum, which was like a massive thing in the history of the environmental struggles. And years later, they have a neoliberal government that's shutting down the lights and giving the energy that they are producing themselves to the mining companies to operate, and people don't have energy in their country. So it's much bigger than. So yeah, the foundation is there. The struggle is really there, but it's not. I mean, they need a lot of support and visibility, and this.
Thank you for that. And we're going to move on to the next speaker. And we have an idea here. If some people have some questions that they feel are important and they would like to share with other people here, we invite you to put them up on the board here so that they can be considered by others and by the speakers. And hopefully you can catch up with them afterwards and continue the conversation. So thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Our next speaker is Sinead D'Silva.
I'm just gonna highlight a couple of scenes. I'll explain what they are as we go.
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'll get my phone.
Okay.
Um, some of them are not printed well. Apologies for that. Cool. So I'm Sinead D'Silva. That's my affiliation, but I'm going to be talking about this community sort of resistance that I've been closely following for a few years now. It's in a little part of India called Goa, um, which a lot of people know because of the tourism industry, etc. So you had this really popular idea about the space, and so in the ways in which it's articulated are very specific, and I think very often there's a lack in understanding of what the people actually are, which is, I guess, a problem with tourism. I'm also glad I just followed I'm following the presentation to just happen, because then I don't have to explain half of the things, because it's a similar struggle. So there's three projects that are, so basically what happened was during the pandemic, um, this sort of campaign breaks out. We find out about some of these approvals that have gone through for massive chunks for projects, infrastructure projects, to go ahead within the protected area that Goa falls under. So there's 36 biodiversity hotspots in the world. Goa falls within one of them, which is on the Western Ghats. And what the government is proposing to do is three projects: a highway, a double tracking of a railway line, and a transmission line. And these are all through different sections of the forest area. Similar sort of justification, and I mentioned the tourism industry because that's the justification that the state uses constantly. Talking about needing to boost tourism, talking about needing to boost this economy, etc. However, what we do know as the population, and sorry about the contrast and not being able to see things, we do know that, so all of the things that they're proposing, for example, with cutting down all of the trees and then having, afforestation measures, these things don't work. What we do know is actually a lot of the things that they're justifying this for relate to coal transportation through the state, relate to the use of, or the continuation of the use of certain industries which have shut, including mining, and sort of adjust. And we've also now found out a couple of weeks ago about the plans for the developing of special economic zones in the area. Anyway, that's a whole lot of again. So what happened was during the pandemic, well, they couldn't really be outside, and what happened was people just use social media. A lot of young people, predominantly sort of led by environmental biologists, etc. But in general, the whole population came together to start to talk about their relationship with nature. So if you're from Goa, it's very normal that you would have passed through or gone through the forest area at some point. We've gone to school and have like school trips through there, etc. We might not even know about it being a protected area. But there was this really big dynamic movement. One example of what the sort of thing is, and the movement focuses only on the protected area because that's the best space in which we can have a legal argument against it. It's also quite strategic in that sense, where we can't talk about it because it goes through the whole state, but there's a massive chunk of it that goes through the protected area. And so to stall it over there allows you to stall how it continues elsewhere, etc. So what I want to do over here through this presentation is, yeah, just kind of, so we've not been speaking about the campaign for a very long time. I'll explain why. But the things I want to do is kind of retrofit the theories that we've been speaking about of social ecology, of libertarian municipalism, because while I've been part of this organizing or this group, it's been really evident to me that there's certain elements of the way in which we've organized that sort of comply with what I would consider more anarchist ways of doing things, or probably even beyond that sort of things. And this is why the theory makes sense. So, for example, I'm not going to talk about that too much, but what I want to focus on in this presentation is on the public pedagogy aspect of it, which is what the zines are about. So one of the ways in which people decided to talk about things is to create content online so that people have access to it, so that they mobilize around it, so you can result in more civic sort of participation, resistance against what, use the state's mechanisms, use the government's governance structures to resist the decisions being made by the government against the people. So I want to focus on a bit on public pedagogy, explain what the zines are about as well. And I also want to talk about how actually, unlike a lot of other movements, this is highly decentralized. We function in a way that's, anybody involved from the population, anyone who wants to get involved from the population can propose whatever you'd like to do, etc. It's anonymous, so nobody can act. So many people don't actually know how it functions. It functions through a collective, but people don't know who the collective are, etc. So I find the way in which it's done, and this is also a context of the fact that we are under a fascist state at the moment. There's authoritarian rule, there's increased violence that the state uses, not just through legal mechanisms, but also through actual violence against people. And so there's various reasons for why this, needing to be anonymous, needing to be that collective and broad. We're not registered as a movement or a campaign or anything, also because of the fact that most of us are minorities and women. But that's a whole other thing. So the first thing to kind of set the scene is to understand that within Goa we have a history. So it was first a Portuguese colony, and then it was taken over by India. The way that I see it and the way that I understand it is you're going from one ruler to another ruler. It's in one state to another state, or one colonizing part to another colonizing part. And what I feel is that, and there's literature, I'm not just saying this, there's also literature to talk about the ways in which the local population does not believe in the sort of democratic system or the electoral system, other than when you can kind of manipulate it to suit whatever you need. Just sort of tells of a kind of resilience of the local population. So regardless of your rulers, you find a form of collaborating, of working together that works beyond, that the state can't actually interfere in, or whichever colonizing power or forms of power try to interfere with, they're not as successful, or there's still an underlying way of, over 500 years, we've still managed to create or keep this solidarity that exists beyond the state mechanisms. So you had a lot of protests as soon as the information came out about all of these plans. People turned up, so young people, across communities. You have a lot of, so you'll see in a couple of the zines, there's pictures of protests that took place. There's arrests being made. So the state used things like Section 144, which is during the pandemic, you couldn't have more than a fixed amount of people in a specific space. So we used other things like, well, you could be organized near the church, etc. But there's very interesting ways in which people kind of got sidestepped or got around all of the mechanisms that the state tried to do to repress people alongside working with the sort of restrictions during COVID. And then a couple of things that have come up over the years. So this movement started in 2020. But the way in which it's been quite successful is that we've had various ways in which this has been attacked. You have the people, so you have people filing public interest litigations, you have people submitting letters to their local members of parliament, etc. You have people turning up in protests. You also have, and quite a big chunk of it is a legal process that has been taking place. A bunch of researchers sort of using your own sort of expertise, submitting reports to the Supreme Court of India. That was one of the biggest success, I guess, of the campaign. So, for example, and you could be anybody from the local community offering these things. So I carried out two sort of research reports on the social, cultural, and economic implications of these projects. And these were all submitted to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court came back demanding a stay on two of the projects, so they couldn't double track the railway line, and and the transmission line should only go through a specific route. The one that we thought that we wouldn't have to deal with, which was the highway, which is the most ridiculous one, they suggested that we should continue with it. And this all happened in 2021. Unfortunately, we're still having to talk about this. We're still having to resist it. And this sort of the need to kind of always bring in the energy, I guess, is something that I wanted to present to this group, especially because this is something that we've been talking about. How do you work within these sort of systems where you are using the mechanisms, etc.? The state has violence on its side. You're moving through to try to work, and how do you maintain yourself without burning out? One of the scenes that I've passed around, um, and so, well, public pedagogy is one of the key areas in which I feel like this movement is the strongest. One of the scenes that I've passed around is about what is an ideal campaigner. And they've put it together, I found really thoughtfully, where they've explained, how this is a bigger problem. They also position it within this sort of idea of stewardship to the land and how we are bigger. And even being part of this thing is not about ourselves, it's about the area in which we live, the context in which we live and that we're so close to. We've acknowledged things around burnout. These are conversations that happen consistently within the group about how to manage that. If you're burnt out, step aside. It's okay. These sort of processes have been something that I have not seen in other campaigns or movements that I've been part of, and I found that really interesting. And also, I feel like it's really important to try to understand what underlies this. Um, Another thing that we've done is like used science, or taken science and worked with artists, young artists from the communities themselves, from community being the local population, to explain a lot of things. So concepts like forest fragmentation, canopy cover, what are these things? What will happen if these projects come through? Are you going to lose? One of the scenes that's being passed around is actually flags the issues of the environmental impact assessment and the fact that, for example, there's a bunch of species that are not included in this list that the state is supposed to have to be able to carry out any infrastructure developments within the protected area. There's a couple of species that have been missed. There's a couple of species that don't even exist in the region. They're somewhere from the northeast of India. And so flagging this, or kind of using science, using humor, using art, using other forms, even your body in terms of like the protest, has been a really important aspect of community building. This is the zine that's going around. No, have a minute. Okay, still have freedom. Okay, cool. And so I guess the last thing that I then want to talk about, it'd be nice to check out the zines just because of the way in which the amount of process that goes through to each of these sort of organism, or these sort of these products, the things in front of you. And also the way in which there's some sort of anonymity within the group, the way in which it's organized. You can, to get through to, I mean, this is like a little thing where I've sort of tried to explain how it's organized, where you might say you want to get involved, you're immediately part of the thing. Just by virtue of being a citizen, you are part of this area. You are part of the struggle. If you're bothered about it, you're part of the struggle. Everyone's part of it. So it isn't a sort of it isn't a sort of registered charity or group or civil society group, etc. If you have an idea, you can propose it to the people. People will sort of put you in touch with other people based on the network, see who has the energy to take forward onboarding, etc. Over time, maybe you can then start to become part of the sort of continued conversations. And again, this is all based on people's capacity and the sort of focus that we're not doing it for ourselves and our individual selves. However, we also are, because everyone's told, well, if you're going to stay in this, you need to really understand why you're a part of it. Um, and within the context of everything, and sorry for kind of rushing through this, but within the context of everything, you kind of need to keep going. One of the ways in which I don't know if this is relevant to any other struggles, but I feel like it might be. There's some other struggles where I see this is relevant. Issues with the state being able to come in through IT, sort of target IT or target where you hold your data, where you hold your content, taking down Instagram profiles, etc., getting into your Google accounts, etc. So one of the priorities for us is to try to learn how to archive the project, the movement, because it's very easy for the state to wipe it out and give you this narrative that there's nothing there. Hence, this sort of idea that anyone hears about Goa, you're only hearing about the beaches, etc. You're not hearing about the fact that people are turning up every day and resisting. Okay.
We have about 4 minutes for questions. Yes.
Thank you for the presentation. Yeah, I'm very passionate about climate justice and digital privacy. So I'm very interested about examples where these two fields intersect. And you said that in these projects, in these horizontal structures, it's voluntarily anonymous. So how does it work? Can you explain a bit more?
So because so if everyone's involved in it, anybody who's named about or named in it is you're a member of the public. You're allowed to be part of it. So because by virtue of everyone being involved in it, um, even if you're named, it doesn't put you as like guilty in association with that. I don't know.
Platform that you
Yeah, so for example, on the Instagram, because that's the main thing that people organize disseminating information. Nobody's individual names are there. However, for example, with one of the reports that I wrote, my name will be linked to it only if it's necessary. There's other reports that I've contributed to. My name doesn't include that, is not included anywhere. Exactly. So basically, figure out where it's strategically necessary. If you need to say this was said by an environmental biologist who is a local, who is this and that, use that as a tool. That's the way we kind of. I don't know if I answered that question.
Thank you. Anybody else? Sorry? Yes.
I would like to invite her in a place where she can grade if you can do it online. I'm going to care about be here. Okay.
Could you ask her afterwards? We only have a few minutes. Please contact her, and I think that would be great to have a conversation afterwards. Yes.
It's extremely interesting. Thank you very much. And my question is more like you talked a lot about the interaction between science and art now. I'm just wondering how is science community involved and how do you manage to get those connections? Because sometimes difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the main point that I have where it actually comes from the community itself. So a lot of everybody involved from the scientist community. It's really funny after a point. It's almost like you're doing these little Mission Impossible strategies. Like I randomly bumped into someone at some other thing. It's like, oh, can you ask so and so to ask for this report because the state's not going to give you all of the reports. So it's generally people who are from the community itself who dip into their networks, which raises issues of then elitism, who can be part of the thing, who has the time to contribute to these things, who's educated within this. I mean, there's other ways to get involved as well, but yeah, there's another such things.
Thank you.
We can take one more question now. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. I want to ask you specifically the role of the youth also in this struggle, how you shape it.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It was really interesting. The first few instances that we had of press conferences that were held were led by young people themselves. So school children, people right from the ages of 9 till, I mean, when I say youth, I'm using it a bit with like youth postponement to include people up to the age of 35 as an extension. Where all the young everybody. But yeah, so you had young people themselves coming up. So, either because again, pandemic situation, right? So doing dances, doing performance, doing things in school, trying to speak to other people. also one of the things I didn't speak about it as at the start is there is a very strong relationship with land amongst the population. If you're from Goa, the relationship that you have with the land and your duty to fight for, not duty to fight for, but your duty to fight as part of it, is something that's just really hit. I mean, it's something that we don't even question. But yeah, that's resulted in people actually jumping.
Thank you. The next speaker is Alex Foti.
Yes. Yes. Just let me connect to the slide. And so I come from Milano. I'm a climate activist. I'm a municipal activist, and I've been trying to push some. Where? What's the board? It's the one on the other side. Thanks. No. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I try to be brief, but everybody says that, so you leave that. And anyway, okay. You just say this to the okay. So I'm a Milanese climate activist. I co-organized this World Congress for Climate Justice in October 23, where also Yasunidos from Ecuador participated. Atlanta, Defend the Forest, Students Against ECOP, and the Galand, and several other radical climate justice movements. But most especially, but I'll be talking in the talk, all this galaxy of Halamites, and we'll see because of Roger Hallam, but anyway, Extinction Rebellion, Scientist Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, and so on and so forth. So the talk will be how to recuperate, a transnational elan in world struggles and the struggles of world movements, and seeing how, like, the concept of internationalism has mutated, not just because we are in the 21st century, but because certain events, historical events and movements occurred that changed the discourse around these issues. Like the presentation is more like a backdrop. When you get bored, you can look at the pictures. So, but there is a table at the end, so it will be more social sciencey. And so basically, I will try to focus most especially from the Seattle, Genoa, and Zapatista movement of the late 90s and on the post 2011 movements to get up to now. Okay, so this, let's go. Internationalism, okay, yeah, this is me for write me Alex Foti Gmail. Okay, so basically, internationalism comes in two sources: the socialist kind, the Second International, and here we have the family portrait of the Second International with August Bebel, secretary of the Social Democracy pre-World War One, which managed to turn what was a radical sect into a mass party. The theorist of social democracy and the Second International, Karl Kautsky, whom the Leninists well know as the renegade Kautsky, nevertheless, I think is an important Marxist theorist, and Rosa Luxemburg, the radical wing of the Second International, and of course, I am Spartacus, martyr, killed by the early fascists in the doomed communist revolution, if you wish, of the councils in 1919, as the Kaiser had fled the country. But of course, because of the complicity of social democracy in the outbursts of World War One, namely the fact that they decided to side with the national bourgeoisies rather than working class solidarity, social democracy was superseded, and the Second International was superseded by the Third International. Of course, I mean, this is not a history thing; it's more a political side thing. So forgive me if I just it helps me trace some stylized facts, okay, for my argument. Okay, so the Third International was created by Lenin after of course, the success of the Bolshevik Revolution. He forced all the socialist revolutionists to break with their parties to establish communist parties, and he was devoted toward revolution. Okay, I mean, Lenin thought he was the inheritor of the communards. He kind of unleashed the forces of the colonial liberation, if we want to use today's language, in his theory of imperialism as the highest stage of capitalist accumulation. That was extremely influential in shaping for the elites in colonial countries as a theoretical weapon, ideological weapon to liberate themselves from European powers. Okay, and so every communist party was a section of the Third International, and this was also true in the Second International. If you look at the Socialist Party, up until the 70s, the French Socialist Party was called La Section Française de l'Internationale Ouvrière, the French section of the international, of the Workers' International. Okay, so the idea that nationalities didn't count for the proletarian revolution. It's true, though, that in the first international, not to leave any international out, this basic argument whether revolution had to be made in a nation state first and then, let's say, federate all the nation states' revolutions, or rather, the revolutionary effort was to be transnational from the start. Marx and Bakunin, after the Commune, really broke on this. I mean, they hate each other, but this is not so important. The theoretical disagreement was whether, the party had to build like a national consensus in bourgeois elections and build up space, which was the strategy eventually kind of prevailed, and rather the revolutionary approach of Bakunin that said, hey, fuck, let's do communes in every European capital, and then we create the United States of Europe. It actually used this word amazingly. But anyway, a European federation, a European communalist confederation, Bookchin would say. Okay. But going back to national liberation. Okay. So we jump, of course, I mean, although the 20s and the 30s for Indo-Chinese revolution was already a formative period because Versailles neglected all the aspirations of the Asian peoples they also fought. And but of course, I mean, there are two phases of decolonization. I mean, we don't want to go into that. But what I mean to say, very important figures for the history of the left and for the history of decolonization are Giap, Fonguyen Giap, the greatest general of the 20th century, nobody excluded, okay? And who single-handedly, of course, defeated the French, the Americans, and so on, and Ho Chi Minh, who's more rather serious. I don't know. I would partner with Giap, I don't know about Ho Chi Minh. But anyways, instead, on the other side, Patrice Lumumba, martyr of colonialism, but also hero because the African Day in 1960, thanks to Lumumba leaving Congo and freed from Belgian rule, is considered also by the United Nations, which kind of assisted the process, as the day of African decolonization and decolonization. For historians, of course, not in philosophers. Of course, he was going to be murdered by thugs hired by the Americans and the Belgian conglomerates. And so this year his tooth was given back to the family. Anyway, so internationalism, after, let's say, the World War I and the failure of the Third International to make European revolution at least burst. Why? Because, of course, militarily, Trotsky was defeated in Poland at the Battle of Warsaw, but also in the West, the council revolutions or insurrectionary attempts were defeated by bourgeois restoration in Italy, with the councils in Germany, we already said, but Panekoik is an important theoretician of Gramsci himself, who comes from the revolutionary councils. Okay, and so there was bourgeois restoration, and fascist reaction in the end prevailed, as well known. But of course, the Spanish Civil War, I mean, and the Spanish Revolution in Barcelona and Catalonia created another bout of international solidarity. Okay? The international brigades brought together various strands of political extremism, if you wish, from anarchists to anarchists to or also Simone Weil and so on and so forth. But what's important, it kind of created the basis and also the ideological fronts that will fight each other in World War II and created the matrix of European resistance movements. If you look at the partisan commanders, many are Civil War veterans in the Lister brigades, the Lincoln brigades, Garibaldi brigades in Italy, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the resistance is a European phenomenon against the Nazi and fascist occupier. Nazi fascists, we say in Italian, also to kind of forget our own responsibilities in the thing. But anyway, especially now, important that we live under pseudo-fascist rule again, 100 years after the March of Rome. But anyway, here it's an important moment of the Milanese resistance with appunto armed women brigades of the Gappiste, like in liberated Milan around the Duomo. And this is a picture of, in fact, it seems to me the earliest partisan movement in World War II Europe, it's a group of Cretan partisans. It's been colored. It's black and white. Okay, sign of Trans-European. So we jump, fuck, man, there is like a fucking leap. Okay, it's the golden age of capitalism, of course. I mean, the partisans, they fought for another idea of Europe. They fought for an idea of democratic, socially just, socialist Europe, okay, if you wish. Of course, Cold War division kind of made hash, but Hannah Arendt on the Partisan Review famously wrote that hell, the partisans fought for Europe. So 68 is the time with the Cold War international solidarity was ending. But 68 brought it back. Of course, the Vietnam War, a bit like the Gaza War now, created a war movement of campuses that altered the political sphere. Many of these student leaders would create the Greens. I mean, of course, as Bookchin said, not a successful campaign. But so here it's Paris and Berlin. You can see who they are. Okay, so but then 68 was still very much a 20th century movement in the sense that, Ho Chi Minh, notwithstanding, Lenin was still very much alive. Mao, communist ideology, communist internet, it was a way of reviving communist internationalism, highly ideological, and in fact, it kind of died, especially after the turn to armed struggle in Italy, Germany, France, Belgium, and elsewhere. After World War I ended, basically, my contention is that the anti-globalization movement kind of created like the transnationalist ideology, the idea that affinity groups from all over the earth, according to no border philosophy, could create a confederation of pink, black, green movements. Black blocs with the big samba bands, with peasant activists from the south in this transnational global class alliance against neoliberalism. Okay, this is the moments of Seattle. This is Luca Casarini, leader of the white overalls, the old majorly to Comandante Marcos. Anyway, we jump to 2011, the year of revolutions. Okay, there is revolution, failed revolutions, but successful political insurgents from Cairo to Tunis to Madrid with the Grande movement to New York with the progressive movement. Okay, this movement was largely the anti-globalization movement, and it was more seismic in its immediate consequences. Fuck, I went to Cairo. They really burned down Mubarak's building. When I was there, they burned down the police, officials, fucking 5 stories. It was the hooligans were in charge. Great revolution. Yeah, unfortunately, the dictatorship spread, but while it lasted, it was fucking amazing. And okay, so Occupy Wall Street. I mean, the name and the philosophy owes a lot to David Graeber, who also theorized that the anti-globalization movement, in effect, was not a communist movement, but it was a global anarchist movement. And I mean, pretty much what later happened. But what a vulnerability, a defect, if you want, of the post-Indigenous movement was that they reclaimed national spaces. I mean, the revolution was again compartmentalized because the discourse was about recovering sovereignty, national sovereignty, which could also be played to the right and would be played to the right in the subsequent decade. And also, I mean, food sovereignty, which is an ecological imperative. But then, so we also see in the matter of material consumption that everything now has to be labeled 100% Greek, 100% Italian. This is a philosophy that didn't exist before. I mean, before the 2000s, if something was foreign, it was more appealing. Okay, I mean, there is this inwardness, which is like, national elites as a complicit in this kind of moral discourse, which is too much of an allegory, of being complicit with international finance capitalism in making the people poor, in making also the middle class. And this discourse is kind of popular, okay, and it works. But then in the end, it kind of undermines international solidarity. I mean, for example, international solidarity to the Greek crisis is very limited. For example, with respect to what we would have thought just a decade before. 1 minute. Okay, the table. You can read the table and you can ask me about it. I can't read. I mean, there is so much implicity in every fucking single cell. But basically, these are the major. So, with Bookchin, class, labor, capital labor, capital nature, socialist revolution, back in the days, revolution. Okay, important the subject, the revolutionary subject. As a syndicalist activist, I promoted along with Eric and many others, like this pan-European movement of the precariat, which organized May Days in all major European cities, also Japan, Toronto, whatnot. And the idea was that, the exploited subject today is the precarious worker, working in care, effective, intermittent, in material industries and stuff. If you look at the climate movement, of course, and I finish. If you look at the climate movement, most of it, okay, it's wide, although it has significant connections, for example, ECOP, we were saying another. But basically, because it's made of cognitive workers who have mostly a transfeminist and post-colonial discourse. But what matters now, and I finish here, is that we are engaged in a global campaign to free climate prisoners. There are more than 41 climate prisoners in jail. Roger Allen, which is the guy below, has just been condemned to 5 years in jail. Phoebe Plummer, the young woman from the Bangkok Sunflowers Action, has just been sent to prison for more than 2 years and 3 months. You understand that? I mean, even the UN has said that this is authoritarian and ecocidal. And so I think one way that, social ecologists and green anarchists should operate is to all join, free the climate prisoners to start with, and all join us in a fight against fossil capital, which is moving us to extinction. Grazie, sorry for that.
Okay. Any questions now? We have about 4 minutes. brief questions and then more rich discussion afterwards.
My question is that, that concept, internationalism, transnationalism, that we kind of make a little legacy of this conceptual definition that is not really, that it's used interchangeably almost everywhere. My question is that this transnationalism, if I understand you correctly, is a kind of a Bookchinite intervention.
Right.
And also kind of a response to the neoliberal globalization.
Wow.
That
International corporations.
and then not using kind of internationalism anymore because no longer appeal to the proletariat as the sole address. Is it
Right.
This is how you kind of define
Yeah, that's how I kind. Also, I mean, it's also TRISE, whom I greatly thank to have invited me to the other, that it's called the Transnational Institute of Social Ecology. He must have a reason. So I provided an ideological justification.
in the US. They still use international sort of name. International.
Yes, yes, yes. In the US, there is a revival of communism. Wow, amazingly, that must be said. But how forward-looking is that? I mean, during the George Floyd protest, Black Lives Matter, I mean, most campus activists call themselves, I don't know if you agree, from what I saw, as socialists. It was also the high time, Bernie, and all that. But now, profile activists would define themselves as promises. And also, implicitly, I'm trying to say, hey, fuck, let's move forward. I mean, we've been transnationalists for over 2 decades. Let's take this to the level it needs, like extractivism and so on. But hey, that's my favorite.
Anybody else? Yes.
You said nothing about the Fourth International. Not that is worthy of any comment, but in your chronology, I noticed its absence. But more importantly, I wanted to ask you why you completely ignored the World Social Forum. And
No, the World Social Forum.
the World Social Forum.
Yeah, I mean, the anti-globalization movement is.
And no, but it's
part of it. Not my favorite
no,
part.
but it's a living organism. It has a name. It has an international council, and it was addressed, for example, in one of its major events, as to the need for a fifth international. And Chomsky, who was giving a lecture in Buenos Aires at the time when they were meeting in Brazil, he said, "We do have the fifth international. It's the World Social Forum."
No,
So
yeah, I mean,
I'd like to comment.
more as a talk shop that didn't react to the murder of Carlo Giuliani in an appropriate way. So to me, I mean, I was there, and I mean, I was invited to many social forums and I spoke, but to me, it was kind of staying by that kind of boomer will to provide a talk shop for aspiring party militants. To me, it was a good aspiration. But when I speak about the anti-globalization movement, I was thinking about Genoa, the Genoa Social Forum, and whatnot. So I omitted for that, but you're right. About the Fourth International, Trotskyites participate in the work on this. And some constructively, some destructively. I would say, though, that in terms of world revolution, Trotsky's ideas and Lenin's ideas were pretty much.
Let's take one more final question. Yes.
I don't imagine you can really answer this question, but I still want it to be in the air if you can say something about it.
Yes.
I have a sense that there is analytic and solidarity lost in relation to the working classes. Because I don't know much about Europe, but I would be surprised if it's different. When I was living in the US, it's especially the white working classes are the base of the fascists.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have a sense that skipping over this and going to, okay, now let's do this other thing, there's loss of understanding. What is the deeper layer at which these phenomena happen, and how are we orienting to this?
I mean, okay, white nativism is a form of working class aristocracy, okay? And I mean, it's during the right, the green, left, whatnot, okay? But I mean, in this, I think though that all industrial unionism was paternalistic, male, aging, highly bureaucratic. What we saw is like a new wave of unionism in service industries. And like in a way, we had predicted it. If you look at Bed and Roses or going up, like say, service employees international union or Amazon, the Amazon labor union, now with Smart or the Starbucks workers union that's unionized many. I mean, like the novelty in especially organizing riders and migrants labor, all the novelties are in service unionism, not so much in industrial unionism, which is more industrial unionism in the sense, not in the anarchist sense, but the sense metal workers. Metal workers, you know what I mean? Metal workers only, they have a hard time adjusting to the new realities of society.
I'm going to stop you right there, and I hope we can pick up on this conversation. It interests me as well.
No,
I have a question. I have some questions for the speakers as well. I will save mine for afterwards. Thank you. Our next speaker will introduce himself. His name is Matthew Tafoya.
Good afternoon. My name is Matthew Tafoya, and I'm a PhD student at the Arizona State University in the United States. I'm here to talk to you about Native nation building, which is a relatively new phenomenon in America. And it's basically Native American tribes organizing themselves for self-governance, but working within colonial frameworks. And
Slides. We're seeing the old slides.
so I want to provide some context for you because Native nation building doesn't happen in a vacuum. It took a long time for us to get here. And I'll try to be brief because this is normally our presentation. So I'll skip the Spanish period, which was very brutal, and the Mexican period, which was also very brutal. I'm really narrowing this down to the American Southwest because we had other foreign sovereigns who claimed land in the United States that created a lot of problems for us. But when America took charge, there were already some colonial frameworks in place, and one of them was treaty making. And that's actually the first era. We have about 5 eras that define our existence under the colonial system. And the first one was treaty making, and it was also about warfare during this time. It was like they were viewed us as sovereigns, as a government to government nation. We did contracts as the treaty. And in America, treaties are the supreme law of the land, and it's mentioned in the Constitution. And Native Americans are the only group that's mentioned in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So our origins are put out by white people, not us. So during that time, it was really about acquiring a base, a land base, and that was also the basis for Manifest Destiny. And it was really just about, killing Indians off, enslaving them, making money off of the resources, and then taking land. And once they saw that that was a pretty easy process, as the population dwindled, it got easier and it got faster. So during that time, which basically went up to around 1871 was the end of treaty making. From 1830 to 87 was also the relocation and the assimilation period. That's when tribes who were east of the Mississippi got pushed west of the Mississippi, and then the tribes who were west of the Mississippi got consolidated onto Indian reservations. It was during that time that pretty much we lost America. Now at that time, or early in the days, we had pretty much 100% of it. Now we have about 1.7% of it. But the interesting thing with that is we also have 30% of the natural resources in America. So we were concentrated in areas that were rich in oil and gas and fossil fuels. That wasn't by our design. We were moved onto deserts, and the deserts had these rich resources. So that set us up for the next stage, part of the assimilation period was moving on to reservations and then moving children into boarding schools or to residential schools. Both of those processes pretty much had about a 50% mortality rate for the first year. And you see a huge drop in populations. For the first year, they move onto the reservation, and then the kids go to school. So that really diminished the population. Pretty much by 1914, there was only 10,000 Native Americans. Now we're around 3 million, so we've really recovered from that. During the last census, I believe the government said there was 5 million, but they allowed people to self-claim native descendancy. So we don't know how true that is, or if there really are a bunch of Native Americans out there that lost their identity, but still are still claim their identity, but lost their citizenship. So the world's looking pretty bad for Native America at this time. And in 1921, they did a report called the Merriam Report, which was a government study to look at the situation because why it was so bad, because everybody was dying off and it just looked terrible. And they figured out that they needed government reform. So that brought the next era, Indian reorganization. And that happened in 1934. And that was a really interesting time because the government was trying to figure out how to, for one, curb the deaths of Native Americans, but also we're still taking their resources. So it was this weird situation. But they sent this guy around, his name was John Collier, and he thought that it would be a good idea for Native Americans to adopt a constitution. So he basically got a draft of a constitution, went to all the tribes and said, hey, you guys should adopt this. And many did, and some didn't. So, but that was the new era. And it was during that time that tribes were basically being forced to form as governments. Navajo Nation, my tribe, we never adopted a constitution, but we adopted the colonial form of government, basically to sign oil leases, because Standard Oil, in order to get a lease, you have to have a signatory, and we didn't have a signatory. So the government says, you guys need a signatory. So that's how our tribal council got formed. And our tribal council was not a lawmaking body, it was an advisory board. The government was still in charge, and they didn't relinquish power to the tribe until 1979. Well, actually, it started in 1975 with the Indian Self-Determination and Education Act. But it took another 20 years for the federal government to actually get out of Indian affairs. And so it was from the 70s period to now is the new era of self-determination. In this era, tribes are pretty much in charge. We're quasi-sovereign, so we're not fully sovereign. We can't go to war. We can't mint our own money. There's a lot of things we can't do. But there's also a lot of things we can do. Even though most of our resources have been taken, and when that money was being taken, we weren't being paid a lot of this. I believe some of the contracts from the 70s, we got 17 cents per ton of coal. The market value at that time was $25. So it was, it was a bad deal for us. But that's just how colonization works. So we're moving into the 70s. Tribes are being more responsive, or they're learning. Oh, we also had, I forgot to tell you, we also had the termination era in the 1950s, and that was where they just started ending tribes, taking their resources and just calling it an end. During that time, I believe 109 tribes were terminated. And mainly in like the states that were more in the middle of America, like Nebraska and places like that. And most of them got turned back or got reinstated over years and years and decades later. So we have a really interesting time. But from the 70s on, we had tribes who were trying to figure out what they can do, because we were always told stuff we can't do. But they're trying to find a ground for themselves. And so some of them started exercising more self-control and more asserting tribal authority. And this is the beginning of native nation building. At that time, people didn't know what it was because it was just tribes trying to organize themselves. It wasn't until the 90s when the Harvard School or Harvard University formed an economic development team to go look at this phenomenon. Because at that time, there were some tribes that were doing very, very well, and there were most of the tribes that were just not doing well at all. So they wanted to see what makes these tribes successful. And they found out that there were some basic ingredients involved, which I'll share with you. This is the native nation building model. And the first thing was assert authority, claim authority, take charge. Put yourself in charge and stop allowing the government to do things for you. The second one, it's called a cultural match. 20 years ago, people called it decolonization. Nowadays, we call it indigenizing. And it's basically taking a colonial political framework and then making it match to your culture. So because we have 574 tribes in the United States, that means you're going to get 574 different types of models, each one based on their unique culture. And in America, the tribes are very, very diverse. A lot of people think that we're all like nature centered and kumbaya and that kind of stuff, but we're not. I mean, we had tribes that were full blown imperialist, full blown empires, all the way to the full horizontal democracies. Most of them were in between, but we had a wide range. So the next 5 minutes. Oh no. So the next part is well, the cultural match, and that's a very difficult part for people even today, because we have a lot of tribes who lost their culture. They have no clue what it is. They have no language, and some of them are looking to other tribes to pick that up, and some of them are just recreating it again for themselves, and they have the right to do that because it was taken away. And as part of the evolutionary process, you get to make those decisions. So we have a wide range of what that cultural match means. Um, the next part is build capable governing institutions. Prior to us taking charge, the government basically established our institutions for us. They said, you're going to have this. Your economic development is going to look like this. Your housing program is going to look like this. So in the 1975 Self-Determination Act, it provides tribes a system where or an opportunity where they can contract for federal services to provide their own services. And it was during that period, I would say from 1975 to about 1995, when tribes really started to figure out that we didn't have to follow the federal government's models. We can actually come up with our own. And the ones that did became the most successful. The problem is, in America, we don't really have a system of communication between all the tribes. So you can have one tribe in Oklahoma, say, doing awesome, excellent, tribe right next to them, just the worst place on the earth. And there's no talking. And so organizations started to form so they could start creating a forum and a dialogue so people could start learning about these new methods. And that didn't happen until the 2000s. So this is all relatively new. And for a lot of tribes, like my own, Navajo Nation, we're still not there yet. We're just barely starting to look at the Native Nation building model. We're still towing the colonial systems. And we were wondering why we're so poor and why we're a food desert. It's because we are following the colonial system. So in terms of food security, Navajo Nation is considered a food desert. But 160 years ago, we were 100% food secure. So we have these models that, they worked at one time, but we don't know what they are because they're gone. So we're trying to reestablish that. And Navajo Nation is, I just attended an energy workshop last week. And one of the things I learned from that is I'd say about half the tribe want to go full-blown colonial models and frameworks, go after the oil, the gas, the helium, just get the last of it so we can get some money. And then the other half don't want to touch it. They want to leave it alone and find something else, find something more sustainable. And the cool thing with the Navajo Nation or Native Nation building is to engage in economic activity. You don't have to stay on the reservation. So they're starting to form holding companies and businesses who operate outside of the United States or off the reservation in the United States, but also outside of the country. And those are actually looking to be very successful. So now that's a new model that a lot of tribes are looking at now is, especially the small tribes. We have a pretty good size reservation. I'd say it's about the size of West Virginia, 27 million acres or something like that. But we also have tribes whose land base is the size of a parking lot. They don't have anything. So they don't really have a lot of options. So those are the ones who are looking to more off the reservation economic development. Let's see. Hit the last ones real quick. Establish strategic orientation, which really means a long-term economic plan. Some tribes are doing a 100-year plan or a 150-year plan, whereas before it was only going to be 2 to 4 years up until the next election. And then craft policies to support the objectives, choose appropriate development projects and programs, implement projects and programs, and also have transitional leadership. And that really means leadership beyond the next election. And train young people to become management positions early on, and then get Native Americans to run the programs. From the 70s, 80s, and 90s, pretty much all the higher positions on the reservation were all run by white people. And so when they left, then that created opportunities. But the Indians that filled those positions were still trained by white people, so it was no change. It just went from a white face to a red face. Everything else stayed the same. But now it's actually changing. And that's kind of the exciting part. And I wanted to end on a positive note that the future for Native nations is looking pretty good. I can say that because I was part of the population from like 40 years ago and it didn't look so good. So yeah, I just wanted to share this new model with you. It's called Native Nation Building. It's developed by the Harvard Institute, and it's actually pretty good. It works. I've actually been following this model and using it as a framework for some of the work I've been doing with food security and built environments on the reservation. As you know, all social ecologies are not created equal, and reservation ecologies especially. So Indian people, or Native Americans, are using new frameworks, and social ecology is one of them, to recreate the reservation to make it more conducive to health and wellness.
Apologize for distracting you. After making the point, let's not distract the speakers. How typical. I turned off the sound, but not a ping. So
Oh,
sorry.
that's fine.
That always happens when you moderate. Okay.
Questions?
Let's start with somebody else. Yeah. Yes.
No.
Hello.
Well, I want to apologize on behalf of the white race or whatever we call it. It's very serious. Not a joke. Yeah. The second thing, I was listening very carefully. Very interesting. If we could have a congress on this, is you're still using the word Indian and you're using the word American. For me, it's very disturbing. I imagine it's for you, but it's a form of compatibility so we can understand each other. The question is, besides the language, is there a possibility that all these tribes have some kind of unity in the future?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Even though a lot of us don't get along right now, we do come together for making political decisions and for advocating on federal government for universal Indian policies. But then we'll close the door and we'll all disagree again. But we've learned that solidarity is important when dealing with colonizers because they like to divide and conquer. And that's always been a colonial tool to keep us contained. Next question.